Thank you, Mr. Leiden. Happy Holy Day, everyone. On our drive over, we were thinking that it was Saturday once again. It is not. I still believe that it is Thursday. So happy Thursday and Day of Atonement to everyone. Well, it's sure a blessing to be here on another one of God's holy days, of course. Now, during the run-up to the fall holy days, I often find myself in conversations about what life might be like in the millennium. These conversations range from, how society will end up being different, what kind of technology there may be, if any, and, how that might, start out during the beginning of the millennium and how it might progress towards the end of the millennium, and even just discussing the logistics of keeping the holy days. It would be quite a different set of logistics to get the entire city of Grand Rapids into this church hall to observe atonement with us. This is not currently a problem we have, but it's interesting to think about what this might be like in the future. Fortunately, we don't have to figure these things out just yet. We can rely on God, and we know that His plan, regardless of the logistical details of it, will be the perfect plan. However, meditating on some of these different possibilities based on what we know from the Bible, I think is a really good exercise, as it helps us reflect on how amazing God's plan is, and it really encourages us as we eagerly await the fulfillment of these upcoming fall holy days. One thing that we expect during the millennium, for example, is that many of the laws that God put place for the physical nation of Israel may be reinstituted. For example, we know that sacrifices will resume for at least some period of time during the millennium, and this is referenced in Zechariah 14 and verse 21. We also can expect that everyone will tithe, both as to support the physical work of God and to be able to afford to travel, as everyone will have to the holy days. All of these things will definitely dramatically change how society functions as related to today. And it's amazing to imagine just how every one of these little things will massively improve human society. Today, I want to discuss one of these changes and pontificate how one of these changes will provide both physical and spiritual benefits to mankind during the millennium. In the remainder of my message today, I want to specifically discuss the year of Jubilee and how the year of Jubilee might benefit society in the millennium. Let's turn over to Leviticus 25, and we'll start over in verse 8. Here we will read about the institution of the year of Jubilee and some of the ordinances that accompany it. This description starts in verse 8 and continues through verse 17, but we'll just read the first 3 verses here today. So Leviticus 25, and starting in verse 8. And you shall count 7 Sabbaths of years for yourself, 7 times 7 years, and the time of the 7 Sabbaths of years shall be to you 49 years. I like it when math works out like that. Then you shall cause the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month. On the day of atonement, you shall make the trumpet to sound throughout all your land. And you shall consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout all the land to its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you, and each of you shall return to his possession, and each of you shall return to his family. The year of Jubilee, to occur every 50 years and proclaimed on this day of atonement, was appointed as a time of liberty and release for God's people in Israel. Unfortunately, we have very little evidence that the Jubilee was actually consistently kept during the history of ancient Israel and of ancient Judah, based on the fact that Hilkiah, the high priest under King Josiah of Judah, rediscovered the book of the law, meaning that they had lost the book of the law. My personal guess is that maybe they lost track of the cycle of 50 years after some point as well. However, in the millennium, we can rest assured that the year of Jubilee would not necessarily be forgotten about. In Luke 4 and verses 18 and 19, Christ speaks about the Jubilee when he preached in Nazareth. He quoted from Isaiah 61 and verses 1 and 2, saying, and I'll just paraphrase this, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor, to proclaim liberty to the captives, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. As the Albert Barnes commentary points out, this language, the acceptable year of the Lord, is likely an allusion to the ordinances of the year of Jubilee, and so we believe that the Jubilee will also be kept during the millennium, as Christ says here. So for the remainder of my time today, I want to discuss 2 points about how the year of Jubilee may benefit mankind. I'll first discuss some physical benefits of the Jubilee, and then I'll discuss some spiritual reminders that the Jubilee provides. The title of my sermonette today is A Year, or A Time of Jubilation. A Time of Jubilation. Point number 1. The year of Jubilee will bring physical prosperity and liberty to mankind during the millennium. Let's turn over to Amos, chapter 9, and starting in verse 13. Every time I see the name, I forget how I want to choose to pronounce it in that day. Amos 9, and starting in verse 13. Behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, when the plowman shall overtake the reaper, and the treader of grapes him who sows seed. The mountains shall drip with sweet wine, and all the hills shall flow with it. I will bring back the captives of my people Israel. They shall build the waste cities and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and drink wine from them. They shall also make gardens and eat fruit from them. I will plant them in their land, and no longer shall they be pulled up from the land I have given them, says the Lord your God. We know that those who stick with God's ways will be prosperous during the millennium. And the millennium and the Jubilee can be a mechanism for this physical prosperity. Land has always been an important asset. In agricultural societies, your ability to grow food is based on the quality and the quantity of your land. And your property is also the center of all of your family businesses as well. In modern days, homes are a major asset. As I'm sure many of you are aware, with the rising price of homes, they can be quite an expensive asset as well. Not only is land in modern times incredibly expensive, but it's also an investment that can be borrowed against and increases in value over time. According to a 2019 survey of consumer finances run by the U.S. Federal Reserve, homeowners in the United States are 40 times more wealthy than those who rent their homes. Ultimately, paying on a mortgage and owning a home ends up being an investment, and those who don't own their own property miss out on the wealth and prosperity that's passively generated by this investment. In the millennium, the Jubilee will ensure that families are never stuck in a never-ending generational poverty. Rather than the current crazy housing market continuing to increase the cost of living and in some cases forcing people to move away from their ancestral homes, buying and selling houses will likely follow the principle set in Leviticus 25 and verse 15, which states, according to the number of years after the Jubilee you shall buy from your neighbor, and according to the number of years the crops he shall sell to you. Furthermore, having family property will also bring families together. Many sectors of today's societies are highly mobile, or they're centralized in very concentrated regions of the country. For example, like all the tech companies being out in Silicon Valley or on the West Coast. And the way that this is set up causes families to be spread out across the country and to see each other more rarely, weakening community values and weakening community bonds. Having a property that a family always returns to, however, can keep families closer together and strengthen community bonds. For example, it's a little bit more obvious to be a good neighbor when you know that that neighbor's family is going to be sitting next to your family's property for generations to come. These are just a few things to consider with regard to the physical benefits of the year of Jubilee that will result in more prosperity for all of mankind. Additionally, the year of Jubilee has a number of spiritual lessons tied to it that I believe will also be extremely beneficial for mankind during the millennium. Point number 2. The year of Jubilee will serve as a reminder of mankind's place in God's family and his spiritual inheritance. We know that in the millennium that mankind will observe the Sabbath and the holy days. Just a quote from Zechariah 14 and verse 16, "And it shall come to pass that everyone who is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem shall go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. Furthermore, as it says in Isaiah 66:23, "And it shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, and one Sabbath to another, all flesh shall come to worship before me, says the Lord." Why? Well, for the same reason as you and I keep the Sabbath and the holy days today. And keep the Sabbath and the holy days before the millennium. To worship and honor God, to learn his ways, and to meditate upon them. We receive many spiritual benefits from these physical acts of coming together and observing the Sabbath and the holy days, and people during the millennium will certainly receive these benefits as well. It's interesting to imagine how different these particular holy days will feel, knowing that you're actually living through the fulfillment of some of them. The proclamation of the Jubilee happens on this day, the Day of Atonement. Being so closely tied with this particular holy day, the Jubilee will always remind people that the reason they're able to learn about God's ways under God's rulership during that time is that they are no longer under the bondage of Satan, as he has been bound in the bottomless pit for the duration of the millennium. The millennium, the wonderful time that these people in the future get to live in, is in part made possible by what this day represents in prophecy, the coming binding of our adversary, Satan. This is the spiritual parallel of how the physical Jubilee lifts physical bonds, such as the bonds of slavery or the bonds of debt, as both of these bonds are dissolved during the Jubilee. Similarly, the bonds of the bondage under Satan will also be lifted during the fulfillment of these days. Furthermore, mankind will be allowed to return to their family inheritance. On a spiritual level, a parallel can be drawn between the physical return to a family property and man's return to God's way of life and to mankind's future spiritual inheritance in God's kingdom. Let me read a short passage from Galatians 4. I'll read verses 6 and 7, where we read the conclusion of Paul's discourse about our positions as sons and heirs of God. That will be Galatians 4, and in verse 6. "And because you are sons, God has sent forth the Spirit of his Son into your hearts, crying out, 'Abba, Father.' Therefore you are no longer a slave, but a son, and if a son, then an heir of God through Christ." Mismanagement of a physical household in modern times could result in the permanent loss of your family home, which can leave your family impoverished for generations to come. However, with the Jubilee, your children and your children's children will not be left destitute forever. Their inheritance will be restored. Just as the year of Jubilee ensures a physical inheritance for all families, Christ has ensured that we are all heirs as part of God's kingdom. Without his sacrifice, we would still be spiritually disinherited forever and remain under bondage to sin. Just as the physical act of coming to the Feast of Tabernacles and coming to this Day of Atonement and all of God's holy days reminds us and helps us to better understand the meaning of the millennium as part of God's plan, the year of Jubilee will help everyone in the millennium understand that they are part of God's family and that they too will be heirs in his kingdom as well. Brethren, the fall holy days are a fantastic time to gather with our spiritual family and rejoice at the wonderful opportunities God has provided for us in this time. And it's also a good time for us to reflect on what opportunities are in store for future people in the millennium. I hope that this discussion of just a small part of what the millennium has in store, both the spiritual and the physical benefits of the reinstitution of the year of Jubilee, has been helpful in mentally picturing the plan of God and what it has in store for the future mankind. These holy days, along with the time we spend meditating and reflecting on what the world tomorrow will be like, are extremely encouraging for us as we navigate this current world and its trials. So, brethren, I hope you all have a meaningful rest of the Day of Atonement and rest of the fulfillment of the rest of your fall holy day season.